Hello, everyone, and welcome to September's Ask the Expert session. It's a little bit different this month. So this month, instead of bringing you doctors and nurses and physiotherapists from hospitals, we're doing a patient perspective because let's face it, we're experts on our own disease, or at least I'm going to claim that. So today, this session is about clinical trials and patients' experiences in clinical trials, because I think we're at quite an interesting place in the sort of timeline of PSC research, where there's actually quite a few ongoing clinical trials. There's about 4 of which that are open for people in the UK, and there's a number of others that are close to recruitment but are currently going along. So I'm joined by Williams and Maria Robertson, who have both been on clinical trials. We're going to try and be good and not mention which clinical trials, just not to bias things. But if you're in the know, you might be able to figure out which ones they are. But at least then we're not telling you. So we're going to go with that. So this is September. We've snuck in before the end of September again, just like I did in August. So I'm staying on my task of getting one a month. So that is good. So if we go and let people introduce themselves first, I will pass to Maria because you're first on my screen.
Hello, everybody. I'm Maria. I was diagnosed with PSC in my 20s. I've had ulcerative colitis since I was a teenager. I would describe my condition as fairly stable, and I have done, well, I'm currently in the open label extension phase of my second clinical trial, and my experience has been overwhelmingly positive with both of them, but we'll talk about that later.
Excellent. And William?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, hello, everybody. I'm William. I'm from Wales, obviously. My disease started about 30 years ago, and I had various experiences with gastroenterologists before I was finally diagnosed, so with PSC and USC. And luckily enough to have been involved in 2 trials as well during that period, and relatively stable as well, thankfully.
Excellent. And I should introduce myself. I'm Mark. I work for PSC Support, but I am also a PSC patient. I had my transplant last year, so I don't know if that means I've still got PSC. I think but either way, I've experienced it, and I've been on a few clinical trials, both for drugs and for other types of clinical trials. But we'll again probably come to that at some point. Maybe we should start with right at the beginning of how did you find out about the clinical trials? Because, like I say, we're currently in a period where there's quite a few open, but that hasn't always been the case. So we'll go to William this time. How did you initially find out about the clinical trial that you went on, or clinical trials you went on?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I was attending at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, and that's really where my biggest base was, although I was attending at another hospital as well. And there was a link between one of the doctors from the QE to the first hospital. And during the parts of the clinics, given the blood results and the sort of state of my disease at the time, I was actually approached and asked whether I'd be interested. And then actually one of the profs came and had a chat, and yeah, I agreed. Yes, of course, I'd be happy to try and help out. So it was a direct approach really from one of the doctors.
It's actually in your sort of normal regular appointment schedule.
Well, yes, other than one of the doctors that was going to be involved in doing the trial actually came into the clinic, which I was with another doctor at the time, and then we had a sort of one-to-one separately, and yeah, it was effectively that. You're right on.
Is that similar with you, Maria?
No. So my first clinical trial, I actually found out about it on PSC Support, and I contacted the email that was given on the PSC Support website to find out more about that trial, because it was being offered in Birmingham and my care is down in London. So I got in touch with them, had a really good phone call with the consultant, and then it went back to my consultant, said, look, this is what I would like to do, and swapped contact details. And my consultant was very happy for me to go ahead and try this clinical trial up in Birmingham and then come back and continue my care back in London. That was it was a short study over sort of 4 weeks of the drugs, 8 weeks of monitoring. So that was nice and easy, and that worked really well. And my second one was during, a bit more similar to Williams. So during my routine appointments, I would always say, I want to do a trial. What have you got for me? And there was one being offered at my centre. There were two actually, and it was the decision to make was, which one do I go for?
Spoiled for choice.
Exactly. And so that's how I got onto my second trial.
Excellent. I think there's two very interesting things there. One is you did the plug for me that on our website, on the PSC Support website, we do list currently recruiting and currently happening but not recruiting clinical trials, so that the information is there. But so you were based further south than Birmingham. Sorry, I forget exactly where you said just then. But did you find it difficult at all to convince them to allow you to go to another hospital to this trial site to do it, or did you have to transfer your care for that period of time or anything like that?
No, not at all. It was very straightforward. So that was a trial that was looking at sort of primarily IBD with sort of secondary outcome, looking at what did it do to your liver function tests. So I did have to have a colonoscopy and an endoscopy up in Birmingham. But apart from that, everything was done on the phone. I took the drug home with me. It was really easy. There was no gap, just slotted in between my routine appointments down in London. Yeah, really straightforward.
That's I think a really useful thing to show that you don't necessarily have to, it doesn't have to be in your hospital. You can find out about other locations. You mentioned having to do some extra procedures, might be a way of saying that. Was that the case with you as well, William, when you did your clinical trials? Because I guess it depends on what they were testing versus what the clinical trial is. But did you experience that?
Yes, in fact, yeah, this was for a drug which was possibly a replacement for a drug that was actually on. So the first thing really was I had to be off the drug that was on for 2 months before starting. So that was one change, I suppose. But as far as actually, I was going every other week for about 3.5 months. So that was the sort of duration. Effectively, the biggest difference, I suppose, was having lots of different tests, which you would have maybe, say, over 2 years, but having it all concatenated and within the sort of 3.5-month period, which was really excellent. So the care was really absolutely tremendous. It was just a great experience all around, really. So you felt you were really being looked after. But of course, you have to be prepared to actually give blood on a regular basis, which is fine as well. So that was part of it. But effectively, yeah, all the good things that you really wanted to happen to you.
There is I wish I had the reference right away, but it definitely exists. There have been studies into studies, if that makes sense. So it's people who are on clinical trials, even if there is a placebo arm, that is you're taking a fake medicine, your outcomes tend to be better than someone who's not on a clinical trial. And I must say tend to be, because there are obviously exceptions to that, but a lot of the idea is potentially one of the reasons that is you have a more direct connection to your care team, or you are being monitored more closely, because they are obviously checking to make sure you're not experiencing any secondary symptoms or side effects. So you have that one-to-one, and I guess that might lead to you building up more of a relationship with your healthcare team. I guess that's a way of putting that. Would you say that is something that happens with you guys? Let's go back to William for that one.
Yes, I reckon you're absolutely right. Yes, it was, because you were really seeing more or less the same people actually every time, and that was great. Now, in my case, there was 4 different unknowns, in fact, because obviously double blind, so there's a placebo plus 3 different dosages, and obviously I didn't know which one I was on. But the good news was you were getting your blood results very quickly. I think, well, within 24 hours, which was really fantastic. And yeah, hands-on directly with the people. So you just felt that really people were really interested and really wanted to help. So if there was any issue at all, you could get in touch directly, very quickly, and you know, be taken care of. But there was no issue, so everything just went absolutely first class.
Is that again? Is that similar for you, Maria?
Yes. So care under a clinical trial for me has been different to my routine care. So whereas I would have an appointment with my consultant, say every 6 months, and then you might end up seeing the registrar. Now I'm within a clinical trial, I get much better access to that consultant, like William says, a bit more continuity, and they're very responsive. So I could contact him, or the research nurse is probably my go-to. And when I did start one of the new drugs on my second trial, I was concerned that I may be experiencing a bacterial cholangitis flare. Could this be due to the medication? I was able to get in touch with them straight away. The consultant had a phone call with me, talked it through. Turns out it was unrelated, and I came in for extra bloods, and I found that routine, you know, extra monitoring, extra conversations with the research nurse and my consultant really reassuring. It's been a big plus of the trial for me.
I would say I would echo that as well. My experiences in that I've been in 3 trials, and one of them didn't have ongoing care, but the 2 that did, I had that. I knew who to contact, and I got like bonuses. I don't know if this is something you've experienced too, but I like to think I'm very organized, but at home I have a chaos thrown in with my other half, who tidies things away, not where I tidy them away. And often, sometimes my medication can go to a different cupboard, and I think I've got some and I haven't. And I found it quite useful that when I was on a clinical trial, there was a doctor at the hospital who I could email and go, I've run out of this drug. I didn't do it every month, but when things went wrong, and they would make sure, they would look after me, because they had to be so careful that there were no external factors affecting my health other than what they were testing. That it was like a cheat code to get my prescriptions much easier than usually going through the channels I go through. I live in a village. If I send my prescription into my GP's, it takes them 2-3 days to sign it off, and then my pharmacy takes a week to fulfill prescriptions. So yeah, I have to stay quite on top of my medication. So I quite liked having a shortcut into the NHS, I suppose, would be a way of describing it.
Yeah.
Did you have to? I think, William, you mentioned this, that you had to stop a medication to get onto this new medication. So I guess a good question would be, did you have to make any changes to your lifestyle or treatment to take part in these trials?
Yeah, that was it. It was two clear months, actually. I had to stop whatever I was taking. So that, thankfully, that didn't give a problem at the time. So at least it's just a case that everything actually goes out of your system properly and doesn't affect anything that's going to come in as new, I suppose. So it didn't really affect me at all. So I was lucky. I suppose you have to have a little bit of a mindset, because it's time and travel, isn't it, really, that you actually have to commit to. So, you know, that's something you just sort of think about prior to actually getting involved and signing up to it. But the other thing was that I did have to make records of how I felt on a regular basis, and there was a sort of questionnaire that, you know, was not that detailed, but at least it was, again, like you were saying, it sort of made you do things on a regular basis, which you wouldn't do generally in life, I think, other than maybe the 6 months before you see the next person. So that was another plus to it, really, and that gave you a sort of a trend of where things were going, or how we were actually feeling during the period when it was ongoing.
That makes sense. I know there are some trials that can be quite prescriptive in terms of the feedback you have to give. And there's one, I think it's one of the currently active ones, I won't mention which one, but you have to give daily reports back to the hospital in terms of things. And that can, I think, have a mental aspect. I get through a lot of the day, or I did get through a lot of the day by pretending I wasn't ill, which probably isn't a very healthy coping mechanism, but it was the one that I used. And so the idea of having to report back daily and stop and think, how ill am I today, I think might be for me, quite a hard thing to do, but that might not be the case. Did you have to do anything similar to that, Maria, or?
Yes, so on my current trial, so I had about 8 months on the study period where I may not been getting a placebo, the high dose or the low dose, and I'm now in the open label extension. So I've been recording my itch daily for about a year now.
Wow.
And as you say, it is, I've got a device to do it. I have to take it everywhere, take it on holiday. Make sure it's always charged. And yes, it's just part of my routine now. But I do get your point that you are thinking every day, you know, how am I?
The open label extension, just to say, if people don't know what that means, is at the end of some trial periods, that sometimes manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies can get permission to essentially move everyone who was on that trial onto what they call the open label. And so everyone is guaranteed at that point to get the actual medication. So even if you were in the placebo group for the duration of the trial, you will then get put onto the actual medication. How long that lasts for can vary. It can be for a certain number of months. It can be until the trial officially publishes its results. It can be a bit variable, but it's sometimes a nice perk to being on a clinical trial, because even if you weren't getting the active drug, you will almost get it. Be sure you will get it at the end. So that's quite nice. Let me look down my my questions. Yeah. So was there any additional cost to you? I'm going to use cost in a very wide sense there. So Williams already mentioned about traveling in and there's sort of a time cost, but was there a physical cost to you, like monetary wise, or any other type of cost? Let's go to Maria first. We'll go the other way around my screen.
Yes, I feel like we need to offer a bit of balance. We've talked about all the benefits of being on the trial, but it is a huge time commitment, particularly at the start. I know, William, I think you said you were going in every other week. So was I. So you've got the travel time getting there, and then you do have these extra tests, and then it takes quite a lot of time for the pharmacy to dispense the medications as well. So you can end up being there for quite a long time. But in terms of, you know, actual costs in monetary terms, in both cases, they cover expenses up to a certain limit. So travel cost and food, you know, sustenance cost while you're there, which helps.
Is that a similar experience for you, William?
Yes, as far as the time concerned, yes, I would echo that. For the cost, it was really the travel, and that's all that was actually compensated, was the mileage actually in what I had. So I suppose when you actually cost your mental health, I mean, the unknown was the factor, I suppose, really for me. And you had to wait quite a long time after the end of the trial before they effectively opened the box, as it were. So,
yeah,
you know, it was sort of, well, you couldn't do anything about it because you actually were going through it anyway, whichever way it was coming. But it was just a little bit lengthy, I suppose, waiting for it all to finish, and then actually finding out what level or anything, whichever way you were actually treated, whether it was a placebo or not. But and this one wasn't open-ended either. So I unfortunately I didn't actually get to go on the drug afterwards.
Yeah.
But I would definitely make the statement that was the best I've ever felt with PSC while I was on the trial.
And I think that leads into one of my experiences as well. I was on a medication that was hoping to deal initially with the fatigue, but also they were hoping it might have an impact on sort of reversing the progress of the disease. And in terms of my experience, the fatigue got so much better. It essentially disappeared. I went from, at the time, I was probably had 4 or 5 hours of what I would call usable energy a day. So actually getting to the trial would wipe me out for the day. But I had this medication and that got so much better. I remember in this period of about 4 or 5 weeks, I was in the evening, I was at a loss of what to do. I could watch TV. I was painting walls at like 9 o'clock at night because I had energy, and it was such a interesting experience. But then the medication that I was given was just a one and done type deal. And I had to go through the loss of my energy back down to my baseline level, I guess, over quite a short period of time. It sort of all collapsed in over about 2 weeks. And that was quite a soul-crushing experience to have had something that I think was helping me and have that pulled away. And so I like Maria said, I don't want us just to give positives about clinical trials. There are some other things you need to consider. Would I do it again? Would be an interesting question, knowing it was going to be taken away. It's not one I've thought about, but I don't know if either of you had experiences similar to that. It sounds like William had with that medication you were just talking about. How about you, Maria?
Well, I'm very anxious already about coming off my 2-year open label extension. There's no guarantee. I'm completely at the mercy of the pharmaceutical company whether they will allow me to continue it, because for me, the effects have been life-changing. So I have got a lot of anxiety about that. And then also the transition back into normal care when you're not being seen and tested so regularly. I'm also fairly anxious about that.
That I think is, yeah, completely understandable. And I suppose that leads to, so one of the reasons I wanted to do this Ask the Expert session is because clinical trials aren't something that repeat, if that makes sense. So if a certain number of people need to sign up to clinical trials for them to be statistically relevant, and then there's lots of other regulatory stuff about whether it's effective or not. But if a clinical trial doesn't reach its recruitment target, that clinical trial won't then wait for 2 years and have another bash at it. That chance and that medication might just disappear. And I think that's something that, on a personal level, I don't feel anxious about, but on a sort of community PSC level, I worry that if we don't promote clinical trials, then that those opportunities will disappear. But again, it's a very personal choice, because sometimes it's hard. I'm just talking now. Sorry, I will throw back to you what you say, I promise. But one of the medications I was on, you get a pamphlet giving you all the potential side effects or what they think might be side effects or consequences. And there was a throwaway line in this one that I did that said, due to certain types of reactions, it may be harder for you to find a transplanted liver. And that was it. There was no more further information about it. And I found it then very hard to make the decision to go on that trial, because I knew I was heading the transplantation route, and I didn't necessarily want to make my life more difficult in the future. In the end, I went for it anyway. That was the medication that gave me my energy back. And I don't regret doing that, but it gave me pause for thought, I think. I guess I don't know if either of you had experiences similar to that with the little pamphlets they give you at the beginning.
No, I think mine was okay. I didn't have any problems with actually seeing what were possible side effects, and as I said, my response was so positive to what was actually happening, and the fact that I was feeling that much better, really, than I had done for quite a long time. Whether that was totally psychological or not, but in the end, I did find out I was actually on the highest level of the drug dosage. So it was a big plus, but the minus was that I wasn't on it from then on.
Yeah. So you did get unblinded, I think they call it, in the end.
Yes, I always call it the opening Pandora's box. Then at the end of the whatever it was, actually, it was about a year and a half, I think, the actual trial all told. Yeah, that was a long wait, but well worth it, I suppose. So,
did either of you experience any side effects? I guess that would be a big concern for someone who was potentially going to go onto a drug. Did you experience any, even if they were minor? So, for example, with one of mine, I got very cold. I know that sounds very silly as a side effect, but they gave me this medication, and for the 2-3 hours after it was like I was freezing cold. I ended up sat in this ward with like 5 blankets on top of me, all wrapped up. It's only a minor side effect, but I wondered if you experienced any.
None whatsoever. No, I was actually very lucky. It was just all positive. Yeah.
I think we're due a bit of luck with this disease. So yeah. How about you, Maria? Anything?
Yes, very minimal. Like I said, I didn't know if I was on the placebo or not. Was this bacterial cholangitis triggered by the drug? Extra tests were done. The conclusion was it wasn't. Actually query whether it was even bacterial cholangitis in the first place. Yes, no concerning symptoms with either of those trials. But of course, I did have to have the extra tests, like invasive test, a sigmoidoscopy. The colonoscopy was performed as part of, in replacement of my routine surveillance colonoscopy every year. And then, of course, like you've mentioned, William, there's lots and lots of blood tests and extra scans. But I do really appreciate it, the research nurse, if she trying to sync up my appointments with, say, my routine MRIs or MRCPs, and if I'm having a contrast injection at the time, she will put the cannula in me so that I'm only pricked that once. So she will withdraw the blood first, and then I will go for my MRI, and they're able to use that. And little things like that do make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for both of you, your clinical trials were both on types of medication, or did you have a trial for something that wasn't medication?
Yeah, my second was not. It was all equipment, in fact.
Okay.
And I was probably one of the lucky people that well, unlucky to start off with, because given my age, I was in the very old MRI tubes to start off with, which were highly claustrophobic.
The really, yeah.
Right. But luckily, I've been able to actually tolerate that without a problem, and that was seen. And then the test and the trial, that was somebody's PhD actually for early diagnosis. So they designed a system which was an MRCP related system, but also it had a sensor to actually trigger the scans synchronized to your heart rate. So I was guinea pig number one, and I ended up in the tube for 1 hour and 35 minutes.
Gosh.
And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And then I found out afterwards the reason for that was that my heart had missed a beat and had messed up the software. So that's why I was for so long. But then this was linked also in parallel to FibroScans. So two things were going on in parallel, and they were actually, this was like 3 months apart, in fact. So it was, the timing was over a year. So it was one visit every 3 months. So it really wasn't very time consuming, as it were. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. And again, it was part and parcel of someone's PhD for that.
That makes sense. So I guess in a way that wasn't a large clinical trial like what we would have on our website. It was more of a local PhD student. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it was.
So because my experience, I've only had the one medication. My other two clinical trials I've been on, one was for a new type of colonoscope or a lens or something. I can't remember specifics, or something to do with the lights on the end maybe. So I had that. So all I had to do for that was go through a colonoscopy, which was, they made sure it was my regular one anyway. Right. And then my other trial I went on it's called prehabilitation. Yeah, prehabilitation. So the idea is, as you approached transplant, you tend to lose quite a lot of muscle mass. Right. And so I was prescribed exercise, and I had a certain amount of exercise I had to do in a certain way, a certain number of times a week. To build up my muscles and see if that then helps me post-transplant. And so I think the reason I was mentioning that is I think it's quite important to mention that not necessarily all clinical trials are going to be a drug that targets fatigue or a drug that targets itch, or it could be a new piece of equipment, or it could be a new imaging technique, or even just exercise. That we get told a lot, I guess, that exercise is a good way to deal with fatigue, but yeah, it sounds like sometimes hard to do,
but it works.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna, if anyone listening has any questions, we do have a little Q&A box you can click on and enter your questions. So we've got one more. So if you've got any questions about clinical trials or our experiences, just pop them there. The last question I'm going to ask is, would you go on another clinical trial if you were offered? So I'll go Maria first and then to William.
Absolutely. So my plan is, if I'm not able to extend this 2-year open label extension, I am going to be lining up, right, which one am I going to get on next? That's my plan. And if I wasn't on this trial at the moment, there are a few that I would want to be signing up for. So there's normally a washout period, so I'd have to be on a washout and then I'd be looking for the next one.
Yeah, that sounds good. William?
No hesitation whatsoever. Yeah, the answer would be yes, Mark. In fact, yeah, if anything came along that looked interesting and I could easily slot into, then obviously I would. Yeah, no question.
I think
it's all a plus experience.
I think it's similar. So I had a bit of a downer from one of mine. I got the colonoscope. They hinted, or well, they stated that I might have some form of cancer, and then ignored me for 6 weeks. And it turned out that they ended up stopping using that piece of equipment because it was giving false positives. That was quite a hard thing to go through because there was a communication failure with telling me that happened. But I wouldn't put that down to clinical trials in and of themselves. So I think if another clinical trial came along that I was eligible for, I think because of the benefits of that extra connection you get with the clinicians, I think I would be worth it. But that I might have a few hesitations. I might be reading the material very closely before I went into it, which everyone should do anyway.
Yeah.
Definitely read the material. And we've had one question, which was about the fatigue trial. Is that still recruiting? The one I went on isn't, although it's moved on to a different iteration, and the newer iteration isn't recruiting yet, but might be in the future. But yeah, keep an eye out for clinical trials that deal with fatigue. But at the moment, my one is long since passed. It was years ago. I'm an old man now. That was the only question. So I'm gonna wrap up unless another question pops in. What I do want to say again is that we do on our website have a list of the current clinical trials and the ones that are recruiting. There's 4 currently recruited. I will go through them very quickly. There's one called Vistus, which is looking at itch and a way to deal with and control the itch. So you can go have a look at our website has the criteria, and if you might be eligible, if you meet those criteria, it's got contact details for people. There is a trial called ASP PSC, which is looking at the potential to reduce the risk of cancer by taking an aspirin every day. That one is fairly recent, but it's going to have lots of trial sites. That's going to be all around the country, but you can have a look at that. There's one called SABR PSC, SABR, and that one is looking at a drug that's anti-inflammation. So the idea is that if they can control the inflammation in your bile ducts, that might have some beneficial effects. And the last one is another recent one that's gone live. One of our trustees was the first person in the UK to go through it. It's called Fargo. This one sounds a bit icky. It's a fecal transplant. So they... as part of a colonoscopy, as they're coming out from the colonoscopy, they spray someone else's feces that's been treated inside your gut in the hope that it will change your gut bacteria, I believe, and therefore might have some positive impact. That kind of fecal transplant has been shown to be very beneficial in gut inflammatory diseases, so hopefully it will be in PSC. But again, you can see if you meet the criteria, and if so, there are contact details on our website. We've had a couple of questions have popped in. We go through them quickly. Someone is considering Fargo. Have a look on our website. And just see if you're eligible. You can talk to the recruiters, and they will give you lots and lots of information. But I didn't realize about stopping all medication. I don't know if you need to stop your medication for Fargo. It varies trial to trial. It depends on what they are trying to assess and whether the existing medication might be unfairly influencing that, so they can't isolate what they're looking at. So get in contact with the recruitment sites. They are more than happy to talk to people about it.
And just on that, I know William had to stop a drug to join one of his clinical trials. I was able to continue all my medications throughout, and I'm on about 4 or 5 for PSC. Most of them are for the itch.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
We got a question about, would it be possible to widen the accessibility of trials? So one thing we're trying to do as a charity is get involved in the trials up front to make them as accessible as possible. Sometimes it's just not possible to have trials outside of certain locations because they need specific expertise of the doctors or specific equipment that only some hospitals have. But as William had experience of, and Maria had experience of, is you don't necessarily have to go to the hospital you're under the standard care for. You can travel for them. There'd probably be something you need to arrange between your local hospital and the trial site, but there's no reason that should be an immediate no. Okay. I'm going to close this. We do have the next Ask the Expert lined up. The next one is all about PSC IBD, which is the sort of the new name for the version of inflammatory bowel disease that PSCers tend to get. It's kind of become its own subcategory now called PSC IBD. We've got a clinical professor in the gut microbiome called Professor Tarek Iqbal coming in to talk about that. I think that'll be a fascinating one. Before that, we have our information day in Birmingham, which is on October the 19th, Saturday, October the 19th. That's in Birmingham. It's in a location that's nice and central. It's within about 10-15-minute walk of the main train station, or you can just hop on a tram for 2 stops and you'll practically be there. But tickets for both are tickets. You can register for both on our website now. But thank you very much for everyone coming along. Thank you very much to William and Maria for giving your experiences. I know it's not necessarily the easiest thing to talk about, so I really thank you very much for coming on and helping us out today. I'm going to say goodbye to you now, because when I hit close, it just closes us down, so we don't get to chat anymore. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.